For those of you who were here last week, you'll remember we talked about just how crazy things were. And every time it just seems that some chaotic thing happens, it's hard to take it all in. And it's hard to just sit back and say, wow, this makes sense, because it so much does not make sense, everything we're going through. And we wondered, is there any chance that we will see some kind of normalcy anytime soon? But then we showed the disruption in people's lives. It's nothing new. We looked at a story of great triumph, which shows that God truly is the great God and the sovereign Lord of all. He demonstrated who He is in an undeniable and miraculous way as He answered Elijah in the great challenge at Mount Carmel. But as we're soon going to see, things didn't exactly remain jubilant and exciting for Elijah. In fact, they get downright depressing. This morning, I want to continue our story from last week as we move from chapter 18 of 1 Kings into chapter 19, and we see what happens next. Spoiler alert, it won't be pretty. But I do think that there are a few things that we can take and we can learn as we move from Elijah's greatest high on the mountain at Carmel to Elijah's lowest point at another mountain. Good morning. It's good to see each other, isn't it? It's good to be here again, to sing together, to have this opportunity, all of us actually here in the same building. I don't know if I ever thought, in most of my lifetime, that would be an exciting prospect. The fact that we're actually here together. But it is, and it's wonderful to be here, and really appreciate everyone who is here, and also for those of you who are joining in on Zoom, or perhaps joining in on the recording that will be available. We're really glad that you have joined in as well, and we really appreciate the fact that even though things are just really weird right now, we're at least together. We're not alone. We have each other. And if you look around, you'll see that there are a lot of folks here, people who are here to worship God the same way that you are. It is indeed a great thing to be here. And it is a great privilege that you have given to me to open up the Word of God with you, one that I don't take lightly. And I hope that we will be able to find encouragement from this story that we're going to look at, which at first glance may not seem to be a great story. Remember last week we talked about the great contest on Mount Carmel, and Elijah basically said to the people, look, it boils down to this. If the Lord is God, follow Him. If Baal is God, then follow him. And they built altars, and remember, they put sacrifices on those altars, and the challenge was to have the gods answer the prayers of the people and burn the sacrifice without them lighting a fire. And remember, the people, the prophets of Baal, they chanted and raved and cut themselves and did all kinds of stuff from morning to evening, but their God did not answer. And then Elijah, after dousing everything with water, he says a prayer, and fire comes down in such a miraculous way that all of the people, they bow before God, and they all scream, they chant, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And then the prophets of Baal are executed. Elijah tells the king rain is coming for the first time in over 3 years. And consider that even. The king, Ahab, whose name is synonymous for wickedness and evil, Ahab is there, which means that he saw the demonstration, which means he probably as well bowed before God and said, Lord, He is God, and chanted it over and over. The king. I mean, what an incredible victory for Elijah, right? This was it. Finally, God revealed himself once and for all in a way that is absolutely undeniable, and he even won over the king. Baal worship, Asherah worship, the worship of anything except for Yahweh is now over, finished, done in Israel. Right? What a rush. What a victory. What a day to be Elijah. It'd be nice if the story actually stopped right there. If that was enough, and if from that moment on the Lord really was God in the hearts of the people and in the heart of the king, that's what should have happened, and what I firmly believe Elijah assumed would happen from this moment on. However, unfortunately, you have to keep reading into chapter 19. Starting at verse 1, this is 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 1. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, how he killed all the prophets with the sword. And then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he, that is Elijah, was afraid. He arose and he ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. Reality sets in. Remember Ahab, who according to all appearances, and I really think that he did, witnessed a miraculous moment at Carmel, presumably was chanting with everyone else, "Yahweh is God," and I think we're supposed to read this and understand that when Ahab came back to Jezebel, the conversation probably went something like this. "Honey, you won't believe what I just witnessed. Elijah really is a true prophet of God. It was incredible. After Baal failed to answer his prophets, Elijah just prayed one prayer, and, well, you should have seen the fire that came down out of the heavens." And of course, the prophets of the false god were executed by Elijah. Because after what we saw, I now know Yahweh is God. And Jezebel says, "No, he isn't." And Ahab says, "Oh, wait, he isn't? But Jezebel says, "No, he isn't. And Elijah needs to be killed for what he did to my prophets." And Ahab says, "I guess you're right. Elijah needs to die. I guess Yahweh must not actually be God, huh?" And just like that, all it takes is one man who is weak talking to his strong wife who overpowers him. And by the way, that's the picture that you get of their relationship all the way through with all the stories. She is the one who is dominant in this relationship. And just like that, the king no longer believes. Even more now, Elijah is a wanted man again, and he has to go back into hiding again. Can you see the problem? Can you see the consternation here? So what does Elijah do? Well, you go into verse 4, "But he himself, he went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, 'It is enough now, O Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers.' And he lay down, and he slept under a broom tree. Behold, an angel touched him and said to him, 'Arise and eat.' And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate, and he drank, and he lay down again. The angel of the Lord came again a second time, touched him and said, 'Arise and eat, and the journey is too great for you.' And he arose, he ate, he drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God." It's kind of hard to explain this to some degree, isn't it? I know I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how does Elijah get to the point where he says, "You know what, just kill me now"? He was at arguably the highest point that you could possibly imagine just one chapter earlier. I've heard it described that maybe everything with that success, it was just so tiring and so exhaustive that he's just overly exhausted. He's not right in the head, and maybe there is some merit to the fact that, just the exhaustion is catching up with him, but I think there's something more. Keep in mind, what is Elijah's hope? What is it that drives him? What is it that he wants more than anything, just desperately wants to his core? Elijah wants Yahweh to be served. He wants Israel to return to the covenant that they made with their God. He wants people to glorify God as God deserves to be glorified by them. And instead, his entire life, he's had to witness Baal and Asherah worship and see them become the chief gods of Israel and see that Yahweh is just kind of a second thought. No one really cares about him. In fact, what does he say has happened as you keep on going here, finishing up verses 4 through 10? As we continue on, it says that he came to a cave, he lodged in it, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." What does he say here is his situation, the situation in Israel in verse 10? They have forsaken the covenant, they've thrown down, that is, they've dismantled the altars, they've killed all of the prophets, and Elijah says, "I'm it. It's just me. I'm the only one that's left." He is carrying the entire burden of Yahweh worship upon his shoulders. Have you ever wondered just what kind of a burden that would have been? He's like, there's nobody else. I'm all alone. If I die, Yahweh worship dies with me. That's the way he felt. Consider the loneliness. Consider the despair, the depression, that God needs you. God depends on you, and God cannot do it without you. That would be terrifying, wouldn't it? To have just that impression of yourself. So what did Elijah think at Mount Carmel? He thought that he won. He had won people, a group of people, a large group of people, lots of people, even the king. They were shouting, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." And what's Elijah thinking? He's thinking, finally, I'm not alone anymore. I've won. The tide has turned. Yahweh worship is now it. And then just like that, it's over. The king has been browbeaten by his wife. The people are fickle, and they have turned away from following. He has nowhere to turn. So what can he do now? Consider for a moment what chapter 18 represented for Elijah. Just think, let's just spitball some ideas here. What could Elijah possibly do for the people in order to show them that they need to serve Yahweh? What could possibly turn the people around so that they would know that the Lord, he is God? And I'm just spitballing here, but I don't know. What if he got the prophets of Baal together and they spent the entire day trying to get Baal to show up, but he never answers. And then Yahweh sends a miraculous fire from the heavens that burns not only the bull, but the wood, the stones, even the dust and all of the water. What if maybe somehow, hypothetically speaking, a situation like that occurred that was so incredible that even the king and all the people, they shout Yahweh is God, and they kill the prophets of Baal? If something like that happened, that would be enough, right? Well, no. It wasn't enough. Folks, Elijah just caused the impossible to happen, and that didn't work. He's got nothing left in the tank that can possibly top that. He's tapped out. There's not another card up his sleeve. He went all in, and at the end of the day, he came up empty. Is that enough metaphors for you? You throw whatever metaphor you want to. He's got nothing else that's going to top what he just did. What can he possibly do if that didn't work? He's got nothing anymore. So he finds a quiet place, and going back, he rests. And if I'm directing this movie, by the way, at this point, he is sobbing, just uncontrollably sobbing as well. And he cries out in absolute frustration, "That's enough! I can't do this anymore! Please, Lord, take my life! Because I am no better than my fathers! I have failed you too!" And then he cries himself to sleep, there, alone, by himself, under that tree. And even so, what does the Lord do? He sends a messenger who gives him food. And so he sleeps. And then he sleeps some more. And then an angel comes back and gives him food again. And then he sends him away to Mount Horeb. Now, some of y'all may not be familiar with exactly what Mount Horeb is, but he goes from Carmel to Horeb. But Horeb is known by another name, Sinai. He goes from Mount Carmel to Mount Sinai. Yes, this is the very mountain at which God appeared to the people of Israel with thunder and lightning and fire and an earthquake and a trumpet blast. And he spoke in such a way that the people were terrified. It's at this very mountain in which the fathers, the very ones that Elijah said, "I am," they are, it's where they stood in the presence of God. Sinai is the very mountain at which God passed before Moses while he proclaimed, he self-declared who he was. In Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 and 7, when he passed before and protected Moses in the cleft of the rock. Sinai, the great mountain of God where Moses first encountered God in a burning bush and was given his mission to lead God's people to the promised land. Sinai. It's the mountain at which God is now going to present himself to Elijah. And so we see as we move on in verses 11 through 13, he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. Behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak. And he went out, and he stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' Now, hopefully, after I made sure that we saw the connection between Horeb and Sinai, that you started thinking about some of those stories of old, right? The Lord passed by. This is the exact same phrase that is used in Exodus chapter 34 of the glory of the Lord passing by Moses. We're supposed to see this connection. I'm not really sure what the wind connection is. There's a great strong wind. Maybe it's tied to the trumpet blast in some way in Exodus chapter 19. But the earthquake and the fire, both of those are elements of what occurred in Exodus chapter 19 when God stood before them. And yet, what we find is it's none of the word shows up, but it's a low whisper. Literally, a thin hush is what the word is that talks about this. And perhaps this surprises Elijah. Maybe he expected God to come in the whirlwind. Maybe he expected the earthquake, or perhaps he expected the fire. He expected the great dramatic ways that God might reveal himself, and he wasn't willing or ready at the moment to come out. But then this happens. A thin hush, a small whisper. There's no pretense, there's no show, there's no drama, there's no attempt for God to demonstrate his awesomeness here. He's not trying to emulate Exodus 19 or Exodus 34 again. This is a quiet, unassuming hush that draws Elijah out. And it is that that Elijah reacts to. And this is the way that God now presents himself to Elijah. And so Elijah comes out, and you notice he wraps his face in his cloak. Again, taking us back to the whole account with Moses and the glory of the Lord and covering his face afterwards. I think we're supposed to see all this. He understands that he is about to be in the presence of the glory of the Lord, so he's preparing himself, wrapping his face. He comes out, and God has one simple question. What are you doing here, Elijah? Well, that's an odd question, isn't it? I mean, didn't God kind of send Elijah here? He gave him, the angel said, hey, you're going to need this food for your long journey, and sent him here. So it is kind of odd. It seems that was God's intent, was for Elijah to come here. So is it that odd? Well, yes and no. Why did Elijah come here? What had Elijah done that had prompted this particular confrontation? And with this, we go back to Elijah's position that he held before. He said, I've been very jealous for the Lord, for the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant. They've thrown down your altars. They've killed your prophets with the sword, and even I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. For those of you keeping score at home, you should note here that we've already read this up in verse 10, right? We've already seen this. In fact, almost verbatim, word for word, the exact same thing. And when that happens, you should have some kind of a Bible exegesis spidey sense that starts tingling here. You should start to wonder, is there some kind of an inclusio, or maybe a chiasm is going on right here, when you have two things that are so similar, so close together. And I'm not saying you're always going to find them. They're not always there, but sometimes they are, and that should clue you in to start looking and say, is there some kind of structure that we see here? And as we look at the story, note, as it begins, Elijah starts by believing that everything's okay. And then Jezebel tries to keep Elijah from doing what it is that he ought to be doing. And so Elijah then feels as if he's all alone and he wants to die. And then the centerpiece of this chiasm, remember the centerpiece is always the part that's the most important. Everything leads to it, and then everything works away from it. And so the entire thing is about this centerpiece. In the centerpiece, God comes to Elijah and appears before him. And so there is some absolute significance to the fact that God has appeared to Elijah. And then he speaks to him, and then you have again Elijah feels as if he is all alone and he wants to die. Now, for us to continue this chiasm, of course, we're going to need to go into the next section, verses 15 through 18. The Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall appoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat, and Abel-Mahalah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. The one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." And so we find out here that God is not finished yet with Elijah. He's still got some work to do. And so as we come back to our chiasm now, we're connecting this up. Remember, Jezebel in the beginning was saying, I'm going to stop Elijah from doing what he's supposed to be doing. And for all intents and purposes, it looked like she was succeeding. But then God steps in and says, no, she won't. Because I've still got stuff for you to do, and I'm sending you out to do that work. Oh, and by the way, God also demonstrates everything's going to be okay. You're not alone. Folks, Elijah might have felt absolutely hopeless for a short time. He might have felt alone. He might have felt useless. He might have felt as if this was simply the end for serving God and it wasn't going to keep going. And you know what? He was wrong. He was simply wrong. None of those things were true. In the end, God says, I'm going to send you out. You'll be okay. And just know this, the burden of Yahweh worship isn't on your shoulders alone. You're not alone. There are still 7,000 out there whose knees have not bowed to Baal. And this story, let me suggest to you, is just as important today in the year 2020 than it ever has been. Because there are some timeless truths here concerning our relationship with God and with others. First of all, let me suggest to you something that's really important for us to understand. One event that happens is not going to change things. Seriously, it won't. It just won't. People say, well, if only I had. If only I could see, if only I could experience, if only ... fill in the blank. Folks, I can almost guarantee you that you will never ever see a greater demonstration this side of eternity that should have changed and shaped the hearts of the people as what Elijah demonstrated on that mountain. And even that was not enough to change the world. Though Elijah, I think, thought that it would. Elijah's situation reminds me of a quotation by the late Ravi Zacharias. He said, the loneliest moment in life is when you have just experienced that which you thought would deliver the ultimate, and it has let you down. How true is that? How true is that for Elijah, who experiences finally the moment, the great moment. This is it. We won. It's over. Baal worship is out. Yahweh worship is in. Golden age of Yahweh worship starts right now. And one chapter later, he's crying out saying, I'm all alone. Just kill me now. The loneliest moment is when you finally experience that which you thought would deliver the ultimate, and it has let you down. Have any of us experienced those kinds of moments? This message that we're looking at right here, this is extremely pertinent. It's a very difficult message. Let me put it that way, for preachers to understand, or teachers to understand. And I cannot tell you how many times in the first 10 years or so of preaching that I felt like I'd finally solved, the issues. I was going to preach about something. I go to the Word of God. I put together a foolproof argument about this issue or that issue. It was undeniable. It was going to change the world. There were probably going to be plaques around the world that were going to contain my genius on those plaques and everything concerning this issue. But in all seriousness, sometimes I thought that, hey, I preached on that. I did a sermon on it. I spent 40 minutes talking about that thing. It's now a done issue. We got it. We can move on. We don't have to come back to this, right? It's over. And you know what would happen? Usually a year or so down the road, sometimes much sooner than that, I'd be talking with someone in the congregation, and they would say something that demonstrated they obviously weren't paying attention because they just said the opposite of what I said in my sermon. I mean, how rude is that, right? For them to actually take the other side when I gave foolproof, absolute biblical response. This is the way that it is. How dare they not pay attention? How dare they not retain that? Or, maybe they weren't there that Sunday, that 40-minute time period that I preached this thing. It's a very difficult thing for preachers, by the way. I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but, when we try to bring about some point, something, and maybe sometimes we have even a certain person in mind, and then you get there, you got it all prepped up, you're ready to go, and those people aren't there. And you're like, well, okay. I guess that's the way that it is. It's a difficult thing. Because, in the mind of a preacher, we're laying down every week foundation. This is a brick. and this is a brick, and this is a brick, and this is a brick. And if you're not there and you miss those bricks, then some of the other things that we're trying to build on top of that are going to crumble. So just throwing that out there, take it however you would like to take it. But at the same time, just because a preacher says something, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to agree with it, right? That's the way that it goes. There's nothing that says that you have to, or maybe, just maybe, because something is said from the pulpit, that doesn't mean that anyone's going to remember it. This is why I'm quick now to point out, saying something once is not going to change anything. It just won't. I am fine with that. That's one of the reasons that I have no problems repeating sermons. Even in the same building, even to the same people. I don't see it as laziness. I see it as necessary. If that information is important enough, because it needs to be laid down, relaying down the foundations. And I'm throwing all this out. I'm using myself as an illustration, but really, this is for any teachers. Anybody, especially those of you up-and-coming teachers, please understand this point. You're going to put a lot of work. You're going to put a lot of attention. You're going to put a lot of time into crafting that lesson, answering that point, doing this, presenting it. But please don't assume that because you have taught it, that it has taken hold. Because it simply doesn't work that way, which is where you need to have absolute grace with everybody else that maybe didn't follow you, that maybe didn't agree with you, that maybe weren't there, that maybe just forgot. And I don't say this to discourage anyone from teaching at all. In honesty, it's the fastest way to grow yourself and to understand things better. Just don't make the assumption, don't make the mistake of assuming that because of a 1-hour class that went really well, that you presented something, that it's immediately going to change the way people think. It's one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn. At first I remember feeling hurt and betrayed. But then I just realized a one-time event doesn't change anything. If fire comes down out of heaven in the midst of a challenge, which results in even Ahab chanting, "The Lord, He is God," if that doesn't really change anything, I don't have high hopes for my 40-minute talk. That's just kind of the way that I look at it. So, first of all, one event is not going to change much. Don't pin all of your hopes on the fact that you said something one time or this happened one time. Let me suggest as well, God is pretty hard to stop. I hope you understand that point. God is a lot harder to stop than you might think. Remember, Elijah thought he was all alone. It was all up to him. If his light went out, then so did God's light. And I can't imagine how crushing that must have been to his soul, to assume that without him, the worship of God would just simply cease to exist. I mean, can you imagine that feeling? Folks, God's plan of redemption through Jesus was unstoppable. And moving forward, God will continue to work in this world, and by doing so, God's people are going to face all kinds of problems, persecution, suffering, things that are intended to stop the word of God, but it will not stop the message of the gospel. This is Paul's point in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says, "But we have this treasure," he's talking about the message of the gospel, "we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the unsurpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you." When he talks about jars of clay, he's talking about human bodies. He says that the gospel message that could have been transmitted any way that God desired to do it, could have given it to angelic beings. He could have simply implanted it in people's minds. I mean, he could have done anything he wanted to do. Instead, he put it in frail human people. Frail, easily damaged, prone to suffering, subject to persecution bodies. And he marvels. Paul marvels that of all the ways God could have done it, he chose to do so in these susceptible to damage jars of clay. But what's the point? The point is that even so, even though these bodies can be destroyed, the message moves forth. Even in the face of absolute worst, God's power is fully on display. And think about it. Christianity itself is based on what? At its very core, the whole basis of Christianity is that the Son of God himself became one of these fragile jars of clay and was shattered on the cross. But did that stop or thwart God's plan? It didn't, because God raised him up and he continues to reign. Let us never get to the point where we assume that we are anything before God in that capacity. You know, the idea that God needs us, that God is impotent without us. Not only is that the absolute height of arrogance, but it is a burden that none of us can bear. It's way too much for any of us to take upon our own shoulders. There is only one man who has ever had the right to feel that way. Jesus the Christ. God in the flesh. And his work is already done, and it's already accomplished. Folks, God is not easily stopped, and no matter how much we might think it, you are not alone. You know, if there's any one specific lesson I want you to draw from this lesson this morning, this one is it. You are not alone. You know, I'm very concerned about what this virus is doing to humanity as people are now isolating from one another more than has ever happened in some people's lives. For us at our house, you know, it probably wasn't as bad as it has been with other households because we've got a pretty full house at our house. You know, we've got 8 people that are living there together, but what about people who live by themselves? What about people who don't have someone else to talk to? What about people who don't have someone to have a cup of coffee with? Someone to pull out the grill with? What about people who don't have someone else that they can sit down and read the Bible together or study together? Folks, I am scared that there's going to be, and maybe there already is, a very dangerous byproduct of this whole pandemic in which people are beginning to feel isolated, alone, unloved. And perhaps you're already there. You may begin to feel like you're the only one. You're the only one who's there. You're the only one who's even trying to serve God anymore. That you're alone. Because, folks, once that feeling of loneliness, once that gets in the door even just a little bit, then it starts to become overwhelming, and it begins to make you think things that just simply are not true. You begin to think maybe you are the only one. You know, there is a musical out. It's called Dear Evan Hansen. I don't know if you've ever heard of this musical before. One of the songs in it is a song that says, "You will be found." I'm going to read the lyrics to this song. It says, "Have you ever felt like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever felt like you could disappear, like you could fall, and no one would hear? Well, let that lonely feeling wash away, because maybe there's a reason to believe you'll be okay, because when you don't feel strong enough to stand, you can reach reach out your hand, and oh, someone will come running. And I know they'll take you home. Because even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, and when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, because you'll reach up and you'll rise again. Lift your head. Look around. You will be found. There's a place where we don't have to feel unknown, and every time you call out, you're a little less alone. If you only say the word, from across the silence, your voice is heard. And I probably should have put in one more lyric, because a little bit after this, they repeat the phrase 10 times. You are not alone. Over and over again. You know, it's crazy. You go to a Broadway musical, which definitely has in the musical itself, I believe, some language, some inappropriate humor, otherworldly things. And what do you get out of this song? I believe this is one of the most Christian messages that should be found. Because where is that place that you can turn? Where can you go where you know that you're not alone? Where can you reach to find a helping hand to rescue you? Folks, if it's not the church, then where is it? If we don't represent ourselves as a place that people can come to look to and realize we're not alone, we need help, and this is the place where we can come to find it, then what are we doing? If we're a place that excludes ourselves to everybody else and we say, you have no business being here, go be by yourself, we are not the church of Jesus Christ at this place. You see, this musical is all about suicide. This song is sung by a kid who tried to kill himself and wasn't successful. And he sings this song at a memorial for a kid who did kill himself. And they're trying to remember, if you are feeling this way yourself, reach out your hand to someone else because you are not alone. Sometimes people feel disjointed. People feel alone. People feel marginalized. And they feel hurt as if they've got nothing and there is no hope. And they're all there by yourselves. And I am here to tell you today, you are not alone. Whatever you're feeling. Whatever you're going through, whatever hurt that you have right now, whatever burden you are carrying, if you feel as if you are the only one left, that you're all by yourself and you are not, and you feel completely alone, folks, you are not alone. There are proverbially 7,000 others who are here with you, who are right there, right beside you. I am here. The elders of this church are here. The church family is here. 7,000 others who want you to know that we want to help. You are not alone. And we need you to reach out to us. We need you to let us know if you're feeling this way, if you're feeling this hurt, if you need somebody else. We can't read minds. We want to help you. We want to know, we want you to know we love you. And you are not alone. Folks, when you understand these principles, like Elijah, then you're going to be ready for that next stage of your life. Once you work your way through these things, you understand this, you're ready to move on, and you're ready to do that next thing that you are called to do. You're ready to be useful to God again, but not until you allow God to speak to you in that gentle hush, that thin hush of His Word. Let Him speak to you and remind you, you still have work to do. So let's get out there and let's do it. Would you bow with me? Our great and glorious God, we thank you for being our God, for not leaving us all alone, for helping us when we have need. Thank you, again, for not leaving us alone. We love you, and we thank you for all that you do for us, but especially for your Son, whose sacrifice gives us the hope that we will be with you forever. We thank you for Jesus, and it is in His name we now pray. Amen. You know, the message was given to Elijah. There are 7,000 whose knees have not bowed. There are still those who are serving God. And I guess the question right now for you is this: are you ready to join those 7,000?